I just want to make sure, can everybody hear me loud and clear?
Yep.
Yep.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Nathan Silverstein. I'm the president of the Polish Club at UT. Before I begin the introduction, I am required by UT Austin's policies regarding student organizations to read the following disclaimer. Tonight's event is being hosted by the Polish Club at UT, a registered student organization. This is not an event sponsored by the University of Texas at Austin. The views expressed tonight are of the student organization / invited guest speaker and do not represent the views of the university or its officers. I would also like to note that tonight's event is co-sponsored by two UT student organizations, the Texas Slavic Club and Students for Central and Eastern Europe, or SCEE. Tonight, we are also joined by the Texas A&M Polish Association, or TAMPA, and members from the Austin Polish Society, or APS, and the Polish American Council of Texas, or PACT. All these organizations are great friends of the Polish Club at UT, and we thank them for being here. In specific, I would like to thank Dr. Jim Mazurkiewicz, who so kindly connected me with Dr. Łukaszewski, thus making this event possible. With that said, I'm honored to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Witold Łukaszewski. Dr. Łukaszewski was born on August 14th, 1932 in Łuski, Poland. At the age of 7, Dr. Łukaszewski's idyllic childhood suddenly came to an end when the Soviet Union invaded Poland on September 17th, 1939. Just over half a year later, Dr. Łukaszewski and his mother were arrested by the Soviet Interior Ministry, or the NKVD. They, along with about 500,000 other Poles, were deported to northeastern Kazakhstan. But then, after Dr. Łukaszewski had been in Kazakhstan for over a year, Nazi Germany invaded the USSR on June 22nd, 1941. In response, Stalin sought help from the Western Allies. As part of their alliance agreement, the USSR was forced to allow their exiled Polish captives to form their own army to fight the Nazis. This came to be known as the Anders Army. It was 80,000 men strong, and in addition, 35,000 family members were allowed to leave with the army. Dr. Łukaszewski and his family were among these lucky 35,000, as his father was a soldier in the Anders Army. Thus began a journey that included passing through Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tehran, Iran. While in Tehran, both Dr. Łukaszewski's sister and grandmother tragically passed away. After Tehran, Dr. Łukaszewski spent 4 years in India. Then, in 1947, Dr. Łukaszewski rejoined with his father in Great Britain, and together they immigrated to the US in 1950. From 1952 to 1955, Dr. Łukaszewski served in the US Army, where he was assigned to a military intelligence unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. During his service, Dr. Łukaszewski became a US citizen in 1935, and in 1954, graduated as an honors student from the US Army Advanced Leadership School at Fort Bragg. After his service, Dr. Łukaszewski returned to school, earning a BA in 1958 and an MA in 1962, both from Seton Hall University. Then in 1973, Dr. Łukaszewski earned his PhD from Columbia University. In 1970, Dr. Łukaszewski began working at Sam Houston State University, or SHSU, where he taught political science for 37 years. Given his incredible life's work, Dr. Łukaszewski made many strong connections over his career. Most notably, Dr. Łukaszewski was a friend of former US National Security Advisor under the Carter administration, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Upon Dr. Łukaszewski's invitation, Mr. Brzezinski spoke to SHSU in 1982. Furthermore, Dr. Łukaszewski is an acquaintance of Polish Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa and has met with him on numerous occasions. Last, Dr. Łukaszewski arranged for former US President George H.W. Bush to speak to SHSU in 1998. Among his other accomplishments, Dr. Łukaszewski was elected as the Vice President of the Polish American Congress from 1998 through 2001, has traveled quite literally all around the world, giving lectures and engaging in civic political activities, and was honored with the distinction of Professor Emeritus status from SHSU in 2010. Dr. Łukaszewski is now retired. In his retirement, Dr. Łukaszewski serves as a board of directors member of the Polish American Council of Texas. He has also written a memoir, which is entitled 3 Uniforms. Before we start tonight's event, I would like to provide everyone with a brief roadmap of how the event will proceed. Dr. Łukaszewski will speak for 40 minutes about his incredible life story and career accomplishments. He will then take Q&A for around 15 minutes. With that said, I now welcome Dr. Łukaszewski.
Thank you very much, Nathan. That was a very comprehensive introduction. All I need to do now is just fill in the blanks, and we'll be done. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. In reflecting on what to say to this rather, I would say, distinguished gathering of students, friends, and people interested in things Polish, I thought I would begin by recalling a situation which sort of directed me to write that memoir, The 3 Uniforms. When my father was, nearing the end of his life on this earth, he called me in and gave me the last instructions. And at the end of these instructions, he said to me, Witek, I have 2 uniforms. And one is Polish from World War I, and one is the battle dress from English from World War II. Throw them out because I don't think anybody is going to be particularly interested in them. Well, at that point, I heard a voice from behind. My daughter, then 15 years old, said to me, said to both of us, really, Jaja, speaking to my father, you have no right to throw these uniforms out. These are my family's history. They belong to me. My father's words that nobody would value those things stung me very deeply. It seemed to me like he was saying to me, I don't think you care very much about these things anymore. So I have them just gathering dust, just throw them out. Hanya, my daughter, saved the day for me and for 3 generations of us. When she said that these uniforms belong to her. There was a moving experience for me for one very important reason. It made me ask myself, to whom belongs our history? Who has right to that history? And that question bothered me for a very long time, until I finally decided that history belongs to those who come after us. It belongs to our children, grandchildren, and their grandchildren. And so I wrote this memoir. This particular memoir, or any memoir for that matter, a personal memoir, is important because it is written by people who were there, who took part in these events in some way, or maybe victims of these events. So this is first-hand history. And there is a school in France called the Annales, which in effect holds that all history, authentic history, is really a weaving together of individual histories. So that was one reason. The other reason was that as I reflected, we don't really know who we are until we learn the stories of our ancestors. We may have a genealogical tree, but all it tells us is who our ancestors were. But it doesn't tell us really who we are. The stories that surrounded their ancestors' lives. And the third reason why I chose to write it is that the general opinion of those who study these things is that these stories told truthfully, recording successes and failures, humiliations and triumphs, the struggles, they are a source of strength for those who come after us. And these are the reasons why I think our individual histories are important, and I chose to write this one. This was confirmed really by my granddaughter years later, who wrote a summation of her difficult project, where she wrote, "If my grandfather could do it, so can I." That is good enough reason to do everything possible to tell our descendants who we were, what we struggled with, where we succeeded, and where we failed. Now, in my case, this particular life requires two things: not only telling what happened to me chronologically, but also why. The background is very unusual. If somebody writes here in the United States about his or her life, well, we know the system is pretty stable, and we can fill in the blanks. In my case, the past is so divergent from what we live today here that it requires a rather comprehensive context to be given to it. So not only what happened to me, but also why. And this is what I would like to turn to right now. The context. First of all, I lived before the World War II. I was born and lived my first 7 years in northeastern part of Poland, known as Kresy. There's the eastern part of Poland. The northeastern part was the province of Wilno, or Wileńszczyzna. It was a province, a large one, but sparsely populated, about 1.5 million people. Of these, mostly about 60% were Poles, about 22%, 23% were Belarusians, somewhere between 8.5% and 9% were Jews. In the southern part of Kresy, these were Poles, Ukrainians, and Jews. And so the Jewish population was distributed pretty evenly across. Polish population was also, but the Ukrainian and the Belarusian populations were concentrated first in southeastern part of Poland and the second in northeastern. This was this sort of demographic and geographic setting. Now, what is more important and very important in my case also is the international situation, the historical situation. When World War I ended, the four empires which controlled that part of the world for the previous, anyway, from 4 or 5 centuries to a century and a half, as in the case of Poland. These empires were the Ottoman Empire in the southeast part of Europe, Balkans, Austria-Hungary, south, Russia, east, and Germany, west. When these four empires collapsed, Turkey and Austria ceased to play much of a role in Europe. Russia and Germany obviously did. Russia underwent communist revolution, or I would say takeover, really in 1917. And from then on, began to strengthen and organize itself to reclaim its pre-World War I territories. In the West Germany, under the Weimar Republic, although democratic, still did not accept the defeat in World War I and harbored intentions or plans somehow to claim its territories in the East. In both of these cases concerned Poland. Of course, Germany voted in Nazis in January 1933, and so we have the two totalitarian states, communist in the East, Nazi Germany in the West. In the middle was the weakest of the three countries, of course, Poland. These were the two, what we call revisionist states. That is, they sought to revise the Versailles Treaty following World War I. And of course, it took only a few years for the two to get together, and the famous or infamous Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact of August 23, 1939, to divide Central and Eastern Europe between themselves and, of course, Poland as well. And so a week later, Germany invaded Poland from the west, and the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. Of course, I lived in the eastern part of Poland, so I was under Russian occupation. Now, in this political context, I'm using Russian and German with intention, because while Soviet Union included not only Russia, but also Ukraine and Belarus, and Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and all those other states, none of these, except the Russians, ever harbored any intentions against Poland. From the West, the Nazis took over in Germany, but again here, Germany under Weimar Republic and under Nazis harbored the same intentions toward Poland, except, of course, the type of power that Hitler used would have differed from the one under Weimar Republic. And so we have this situation now, end of 1930s, Poland invaded by the two flanking powers and divided between themselves. This, of course, left us in the East. As soon as the Russians came in, the Sovietization of country began. And in this connection, I would like to, with your permission, read a quotation from Alexander Smolar. Alexander Smolar is still alive, I believe. He's in Poland. He headed or still heading the Batory Foundation in Poland. He wrote this article for Daedalus, which is a semi-annual periodical published by Yale University. He wrote this, and I quote, "Poles faced two enemies at once, Germany and the Soviet Union. That, however, was not the way certain ethnic minorities saw it. For most all ethnic Germans, Lithuanians who were Polish citizens, as well as for many Belarusians, Ukrainians, and Jews, the dual onslaught was looked upon as a liberation and an occasion for celebration." Now, this was not without encouragement by the Soviets. What I would like to emphasize here is what happens when an area is inhabited by minorities and the law and order system collapses. The first thing they do is turn inward toward themselves for protection and for advancement of their own interests. In other words, the state administration collapses, minorities become the protectors of their members. Excuse me for this digression, but when I look at law and order being undermined in this country, what do I see? I personally see a parallel to those days, those years back at the end of 1930s and beginning of 40s. There is a dangerous situation, and I'm saying this with full consciousness that I may be accused of all kinds of things. But that is the way I see it. I've been in both places. I was there and I'm here. I can recognize the signs. So let me go back to my story. The Sovietization actually involved complete disintegration of society. Minorities were encouraged to rob or loot properties of those who were more wealthy, to kill them if necessary. Spying became a disease. Nobody could trust anybody else. In the winter, I remember that winter of 1939, 40, we would walk outside in the morning, could see steps in the fresh snow under our windows. People were listening, trying to overhear what was being said. So if we wanted to talk about something, we adults, in small groups in inner rooms. This type of fear of being able to say one wrong word and you're gone, you're arrested. Nationalization of property, obviously. Peasants were forced to deliver their produce to government authorities, which resulted in food shortages within a couple of weeks after the invasion occurred. It was fear, it was spying, it was conflict, it was social disintegration where everybody was afraid almost of everybody else. Now, this lasted for about 5 months. After 5 months, in the beginning of 1940, the Russians implemented what they were doing in this part of the world, in Poland especially, literally for centuries. They would raid these countries, abduct people that they needed, and send them to far reaches of Imperial Russia. They were limited by primitive technology, how many people they could cart away in horse-drawn carriages, hundreds, thousands. Now, with the trains and mid 20th century technology, they could do more harm. And so beginning in February 10th, 1940, they began to arrest hundreds of thousands of people across the board of Eastern Poland and deport them to the Soviet Union. The first and the worst of all deportations was the one on February the 10th, 1940. That particular year, the winter was particularly severe. Small children froze on the way to the railroad stations, were taken away from their parents and thrown off from the sleighs. And literally, small bodies were being found in spring when the snows thawed, lying out in the field. These people were then deported to the far north of Siberia, labor camps, and they suffered the most. I was deported. My mother and I were deported on April 13th, 1940. Now, April 13th, the weather was milder, but our deportation had a unique aspect to it. The people who were deported in our sort of deportation included families of the officers who at that precise moment were being executed in cotton forest and the nearby outlying areas. 25,000 of them shot in the back of the head, murdered in cold blood. The families of these people were being deported. They're being told they were being transported to rejoin their husbands, their brothers, their fathers. I mean, the evil of saying this to families whom they were killing, whose members they were killing, was just beyond belief. But that's the way that system worked. Then there was another deportation in June of 1940, and again in June of 1941. All total, about 950,000 people were deported. Most of them were civilians or families of soldiers and others who had been either killed or deported before. We were deported to northeastern Kazakhstan, or about, maybe at most 400 kilometers away from the western border of China. Major city was Semipalatinsk, Semey, as it is called now today, as a part of Kazakhstan. The life in, how are we doing the time, Nathan?
I'd say we have another
15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me speed up the story a little bit. The life there was cruel. It was very, very cold in the winters, extremely hot in the summers. We were on the edge of the Kazakhstan desert. Work was very difficult, very hard for a woman of 30 years and myself, who was then about 8, 9. It was much too hard. So we had to resort to stealing. A mother would go to pick up some pine cones and then stray into the potato field, fill the middle of the bag with potatoes and then put some pine cones. I was sitting on top of on a tree as a lookout, an 8-year-old, 9-year-old. In the winter, we stole wood from government institutions to heat our homes. Most of the time, we lived in Zhimyanka. The Zhimyanka, if you look at the Wikipedia, will tell you that this is the way people used to live 10,000 years ago. It was a hole dug in the ground with thatched roof above and a sort of sloping entry into it. I couldn't heat this place in the winter because if you did, all the bugs would crawl out of the earthen walls. Of course, when snow thawed, you had mud for mud puddles for your floors. And of course, one room, one big, and that was it. I became a thief in Russia. I remember very clearly we were out in the city at one time and at the railroad station. And as I walked out of the railroad station, I remember there was a torn out door leaning against a building. And 2 Russian soldiers with rifles were leaning against the door and asleep. As I looked in between the wall and the door, there was half a bottle of vodka. Of course, the thief in me saw opportunity, right? So I snuck through in the back between the wall and the door, picked up the half a bottle of vodka and walked very slowly, very calmly on the other side. Came back to my mother and with pride showed her the vodka. I got such a beating. I never forgot. Mother gave me such a beating and she cried and I cried. And she kept on telling me, Witold, we steal to survive. We don't steal to steal. This is what these women had to face. In the end, since my mother came from a family which were traders, she decided that she was going to take an enormous risk. Kanonierko, the town where we were was about 60 kilometers from a major city, Semipalatinsk. She would hitchhike to Semipalatinsk, a 30-year-old, 31-year-old woman, with an empty suitcase, buy as much vodka there as possible, bring it home, and then sell to local population. Now, the problem was this. There was an NKVD station in Kanonierka. She had to first decide whether to offer the NKVD the vodka. And if she did, they decided to arrest her. They would take her away immediately and I would be left completely alone. Or if she decided not to offer them and they would find out, and they would do the same. So this was the type of decision that she had to make. She finally decided, as it turned out wisely, to offer it to the NKVD. They were glad to buy and she was glad to sell. This is how she supported us in times when we couldn't go out in the field and gather some whatever there was left after the combines picked up whatever they grew, millet and whatever else and the like. And so this was the kind of life we led to survive. There was one other item, one very important function that women, mothers faced, and that is indoctrination of their children. I remember very well when teacher came to the classroom. I was at the first or second grade Russian school, and brought with her a fistful of red scarves, and said, "Whoever will volunteer to join the pioneers will get a free red scarf." Guess who raised his hand first? I did. I mean, I was a joiner. I was willing to do it. Well, that day, mother already knew about it before I even got home. She set me down on the chair, and in a voice which even a kid of 9 knew that he could not ignore, explained to me again, these were our enemies. This was godless doctrine that I would become a member of Communist Party, those who invaded Poland, this whole thing. Now, she again took an enormous risk. If the kid, for some reason, revealed it, should be gone. Now, my mother did it. Other mothers did it, those of all those, to save the children. And most of them were saved. So this woman took on the entire Soviet empire, literally, because there was no hope then for us that we would ever get out of there. We were in far reaches of Stalin's empire. And as we were told when we arrived there, abandon all hope, you'll never get out of here. And so this is the kind of struggle that these single parents, mothers, had to lead to save their children. Well, as Nathan mentioned earlier, then came June 1941. And the two bandits which attacked Poland attacked each other. And one of the conditions of Western help for struggling Russia, which they were being beaten by Germans right and left, was to release at least the Polish army. General Anders said, "I'm going to get out everybody I can, military or civilian." And so that's, as Nathan pointed out, how I got out of Soviet Union. Well, from the Soviet Union across the Caspian Sea, we went to Pahlavi, to Iran, from Pahlavi to Tehran. In Tehran, there are already, Polish schools organized by Polish government in exile. And I began to study in Polish schools. Of course, the conditions were primitive. We wrote on little tablets and sat on stones outside in the woods. From Tehran, we went south to Ahvaz, and then Basra, the Persian Gulf, to Karachi. Then it was still India, now Pakistan. And from Karachi to Bombay and down to Kolhapur, to India, where we stayed for the remainder of the war years. There, of course, scouting was a big thing, sports, and then schools were organized, normal schools. And I have to give credit to teachers. They truly, at every stop wherever we went, there were schools, and they taught, and they, without pay. And the fact that I could eventually get my PhD, I owe it to them. Well, there's one other thing that I needed to, or would like to emphasize, is while in India, as a Boy Scout, I was applying for or trying to earn Eagle Scout degree. And part of that Eagle Scout degree was that we had to spend 24 to 36 hours in some forested, isolated area. Of course, in India, that was jungle. And so normally you would have to go alone, since this was jungle in India, far away from Poland. We were permitted to go in pairs, but we couldn't talk to each other and we couldn't be seen by any other human being. Well, we walked and to a dirt road which led to nearby jungle. We climbed down one part of the embankment of a ravine, up the other, and there was the jungle. Of course, we couldn't just walk in the jungle. You have to find a route, well, we found a dry riverbed. And we were walking into the jungle deeper and deeper. It was getting sort of a little bit dusk already. We looked at one another, and I could see in his eyes, I could see in my eyes. We were free. We were completely free. We could do anything we wanted. Jump up, start fires, scream, anything. But just as we realized this, we also realized that the jungle was free also. We could be had for early dinner at any time by any animal. Well, we survived sleeping in the trees and emerged from there. And believe me, every moment we spent, it was looking around for danger to your life. And as we walked out of the jungle, we looked across the ravine far away there. There was a primitive Hindu village. I've never seen anything more beautiful than that village, that primitive Hindu village. No paved roads, everything dirt. And I realized years later, when I remember Louis Armstrong stepped out of the lunar lander and said, "One small step for man, one a giant leap for humanity." I said to myself, no. Across that ravine into that primitive village, that was a giant step. I used to lecture about this experience to my students in classes. I said, be careful when you use the word freedom. What do you mean by this? Is it freedom of the jungle? Or is it freedom of that village, traditional, backward, but people walk around safely, talk to one another? And everything is built on this. And so that's the last part of what my presentation. There's much more, but we don't have the time to do it. But there are lessons to be learned. We are free in Russia, in Siberia, in the sense that my mother chose to act a certain way, regardless of danger. We are free in the camps in Persia and India, but we are free in the circumscribed area within the camp. We are free in the jungle, but with all those experiences that I told you about. And we are free here. And each one of these freedoms was different. And the whole struggle the human race has been engaged in is to work out a formula of what freedom means. Anything from totalitarian system to jungle to camp or to we have here. Thank you. Okay, I can take questions now.
Yeah, so anybody who has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it. We have 10 minutes left with Dr. Łukaszewski. This is definitely no time to be shy. All right, well, I do have one question, which is 3 uniforms available for purchase anywhere?
No, I submitted it to a couple of publishers. They read it and they said, there is no audience sufficiently large enough to warrant our investment in it. To be quite honest, I wrote this memoir primarily for my descendants, from my daughter, from my grandchildren, it encompasses all of the same things I told you about and more, but it is not for sale now. I had it printed for myself at my own expense, a number of copies, but it has not been published.
I see. All right, other questions?
That's why they didn't publish the book.
I think it's a shame.
Łukaszewski, Jim Mazerecki.
Hello, Jim.
Howdy. Thank you for doing this. A great conversation, a very touching, heartfelt story. Would you be willing to allow some of us to purchase a copy of your manuscript? Or your
Yes. Well, not purchase. I have a few, about 4 copies left. And then I have several rough drafts, which are pretty close to what the finished copy would be like. So I'd be willing to share it with you, yes. But not to sell, but just to give you.
Thank you. Dr. Łukaszewski, tell us about Brzezinski. I know he was a very bright, very smart individual. I know he was your friend. Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Brzezinski?
Yes, well, I met him first by telephone. He was the director of the policy planning staff in the Department of State in Washington. I was just about ready to write my doctoral dissertation. And so it so happened unusually that all the professors that could supervise my dissertation either were on leave, sabbatical, or one of them, Henry L. Roberts, said, I can take it, but the next year I'm leaving for Dartmouth. So then, I can't supervise for it. So he said, the only one you can hope for is call Brzezinski in the State Department. He is coming back next year. He can do it. So I called him the first time. He said, no. But so I said, give me a call in about a week or two. So I called him again. He said, okay, on one condition. I said, what is it? He said, that you write the whole dissertation before he submitted to me. Not chapter by chapter, which is usually that's when dissertations are done. Well, I had no other option. I said, okay. And so I submitted my first proposal, second, third, fourth. The fourth proposal, I went to see him. I said, Dr. Brzezinski, I may not be the brightest students you've ever had, but I'm certainly determined. He looked at me, smiled, and he said, don't be so down on yourself. He said, I had to rewrite my latest article for Foreign Affairs 5 times. So, oh my God, for me, this was, huge compliment. Then, of course, I went to see him a couple of times after I submitted my dissertation. He read it and wrote back to me, not acceptable. You have to cut it in half. That's like cutting your hands off. We worked on it for such a long time. It's how you cut it in half. That hurts. And write a different methodology chapter. So I did that, and he accepted it right away. In fact, he called me in a couple of times. I flew from Texas to New York to Columbia 3 times. First and second times, I had with him 5-minute interviews. That's it. And the interview with Brzezinski was unique in that you walk in his office. He's a very nice person. For first 30 seconds, nice pleasantries. He point out things for you where he received some kind of award. He pointed that out. And then he switches to business, completely different person. To the point, very succinct. After 5 minutes, I could leave, and I knew exactly what to do next. The last interview I had with him was 45 minutes. I was in heaven, but that was a lot of conversation. We talked over the phone, and then I invited him over to Sam Houston, in which he was very willing to come. A very unusual person. He could summarize his concept so quickly and so succinctly, so few words, and that he became almost, famous for the succinctness. You read his book, read his articles. I mean, it was so pithy that you've got to read a sentence and sort of go over it once, twice to really get all the meaning out of it. Yeah, it was a very nice relationship. One thing I told him once, I said, Dr. Brzezinski, I stole your methodology from you, you know that. He said, what? I said, you offered one course. Well, Columbia permitted for us to take one course for credit only. No exams, nothing. You don't have to do a thing. You don't even have to attend classes. So I registered for this course for that. And I attended every class. I sat in the back. I closed my eyes and followed him as he weaved his way through different subjects. Followed his mind every step of the way, all semester long. And that was the most useful course I've ever taken from anybody. If the methodology of the professor is good and you really want to learn it, just go to class and just, if they permit you, just follow his mind as he analyzes everything. It's amazing. So this is the type of relationship I had with him.
All right. So as we kind come up on the hour. I just want to do one last check to see if anybody has any last questions.
Yes, I do. I just want to thank you, first of all, Doctor, for speaking to us. It was a really great talk. You said earlier that you see some parallels between your experiences and what is currently happening in the world. And I was just wondering if you have any advice for the younger generations on how to, I guess, protect the integrity of our society.
Very good question. A very complex question. First of all, I would recommend analyze very carefully everything you're being told. Seek proof, seek evidence. Do not follow epithets, general statements. That's number one. Number two, be truthful to yourself. It is better to be truthful and suffer consequences than betray yourself. Your values as a human being matter, very much so. Ideologies of any kind force you to ignore reality in order to follow the ideology. No human being has ever devised an ideology which encompasses all human experience, explains it adequately. Every ideology forces you to choose between what is real and what is fictitious. That requires effort on our part, yes, but that's what it takes.
Thank you.
Professor Łukaszewski, how can we get a copy of the recording of this lecture?
Well, that's for Nathan to answer.
Yes, excellent question. I will be sending the recording out either tonight or tomorrow, and I'm going to be sending it to a lot of different sources, both UT student organizations that are here, the Polish Club at UT, and then the Polish Club at Texas A&M, as well as Dr. Mazurkiewicz from the Polish American Council of Texas, the board of directors for the Austin Polish Society. I'll also be sending it to Dr. Łukaszewski himself, so it'll be around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. I would like to thank you for listening to me, and hope it made some difference in your understanding what was and what is.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Łukaszewski, for your time, for telling us your story today, including a lot of, I'm sure, what are painful moments being here with us. We have so much to learn from you. You are such an incredible individual and have such an amazing story. And you're really a role model to all of us, especially the young generation. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.